Plain Truth, the show where we get into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Wahid Azal, who writes about esoteric and, I guess you would say, Eurasian affairs. Wahid, are you there?
I'm here. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And along for the ride is my friend Jerry. Jerry?
Hi, good morning, guys.
Good morning. Okay, well, Wahid, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going too far?
Well, I'm an Iranian American Australian currently living in Germany. I'm a Shia Muslim and a Sufi, born in Iran, raised in the West, and I came back to my own tradition of Shia Islam in my late teens. Was initiated into a Sufi order. Since that time, I have become a founder of a Sufi order myself called the Fatimiyya Sufi order, which is basically esoteric Shiism together with paying respect to the ancient Zoroastrian sacrament of the Hayoma of the Iranian people.
Okay. Well, okay, that's a good start. Now, you're also a writer of, let's say, Eurasian affairs, right?
Yeah, Eurasian affairs. Iranian affairs, basically, yeah.
Okay, so geopolitical stuff.
Geopolitics.
And I guess most people would find your work to be about Sufism. Can you tell us a web page or where we could find some more information on some of your stuff?
You could go to my blog on Blogspot, which is wahidazal.blogspot.com. That has a lot of my writings, and I link to some of the other pages where some of these writings appear. You can go to my Academia edu page, where you can find PDFs of a lot of the stuff I write as well. And also for the Center for Syncretic Studies, which has just recently published 3 of my articles.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, I just recently read your article about the terrorist event in Sydney, which, of course, looks like yet another step in, what can we call it, building a wall, right? The brick in the wall just keeps getting more and more built, and that's particularly relevant with what just happened in France, which we can get into a little bit throughout the interview here. But, a lot of people don't appreciate it, but the Eurasian political angle is quite important. That really gets into the nexus between Europe, Russia, and then the future economic growth in the middle of Asia, which is going to be quite significant. I thought I'd mention that as an Iranian, I always thought of the Iranian exile community as being really, really full of, what shall we say, the Langley crowd. Am I wrong?
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, not all of them, but there's a sizable proportion of these people who are some of the leftover monarchists from the revolution, or some of the disenchanted left communists that the regime or the government of Iran had to get rid of because these people were increasingly becoming fifth columnists of Western interests.
Mm. Yeah, well, I lived in Los Angeles once upon a time and knew a number. Tehrangeles, yes, the capital of Iran. Well, maybe not the capital. Maybe Tehran is still more important, but UCLA and various areas down there surely seem to be full of the Iranian community. And I
did my master's degree in Islamic studies there at UCLA.
Oh, did you?
Briefly studying under Hossein Ziai in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. I was meant to do a PhD there, but I found a really good job in New York and left.
Well, I can't blame you. Academia is kind of like entering an ascetic order or something, right? You agree to be poor forever. And you come out and you can never file for bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy, exactly.
It's really an acquired taste for most of us. But
it is, and it's become an industry, especially in these area disciplines. Area studies like Middle Eastern Islamic studies, Asian studies, etc. It really It is, who was it? Henry Giroux recently wrote a piece saying that we can't talk about the military-industrial complex without talking about the military-industrial academic complex. So it is very much part of a wider capitalist, corporatic order, if you would. And dissenters, intellectual dissenters are punished. They lose their jobs, or they're not allowed to research into certain areas without, some kind of backlash. So, I basically cut my losses and left in 1997 and went to New York.
Hey, this is going to sound anti-American, but in many countries in Europe, one can go to university for free.
Yeah.
And even English in Germany, Finland, Sweden, different countries, even you can get a degree in English.
Yeah.
So for all those rebels out there from America, it is a chance to try a different lifestyle out. However, realistically, you're still going to be poor going through school, but at least you won't come out with a massive debt that can hardly be discharged. But anyway, moving on. I guess we can get closer to today's topic, which I think we're going to call the Occult War. So, Wahid, what do you think about this Occult War? What is that? How long has it been going on? Who?
Well, this is a deep topic. I mean, what most people in the mainstream understand about the Occult War, they think it is, basically one or two secret societies duking it out on the geopolitical level through ages and eons, etc. That is true on one level. There may be organizations or any organization which, popularly is designated with the term Illuminati. I don't particularly believe there is such an organization by that specific name, because René Guénon, to his credit, wrote that real hyper-secret societies that are influencing world events don't leave traces. They don't leave documents behind and nothing. But what the Occult War is a ontological thing at the very foundation. And to understand what this means, one has to go back to the narratives of ancient traditions. For me, this means the Zoroastrian tradition, which gives a very lucid narrative about what we're dealing with. The world, the world is an emanation of the ultimate. You can call it God, you can call it the Godhead, whatever designation your tradition posits this by. But in this emanation of the world, there is also a counterpower that kind of as a necessity of the ontological construction of the multiverse also simultaneously comes about. This is at a much lower level. But on the material spatio-temporal worlds, these levels that we humans live at, it manifests in the form of the war of the light and dark. Interestingly enough, this very narrative appears in the esoteric teachings of the Shia Imams of 12er Shiism, where one of the earliest narrations in this collection of sayings compiled by this 12er Shiite scholar by the name of Khomeini starts with saying that in the beginning God created the intellect, and after he created the intellect, he then created the ignorance, aql wajah, and that throughout the sacred eons of time, that the whole narrative of cosmic history is about the clash between the forces of ignorance and the forces of the intellect. The forces of the intellect representing the forces of the divine, the light, and the forces of ignorance representing the forces of dissolution and the darkness, etc. This is exactly the same narrative that you get in Zoroastrian scriptures, the war of the light, or the forces of Ahura Mazda versus those of Angra Mainyu, the counterpowers of darkness. And this is true. We don't need to necessarily even buy into details of what these sacred narratives write. But people, based on their own experience in life, see that this sort of manifests not just on the material plane, but on the psychic plane, that these realities have some kind of a tangibility to them. Maybe not a material tangibility, but the tangibility nevertheless in experience. So where the occult war commences is on these planes of the unconscious And these planes of the unconscious should not be reduced to just mere Jungian abstractions of archetypes that have no reality other than some kind of a psychological abstraction. They have a real ontological reality in these worlds that we are in.
Are you talking about like almost like a demonic type thing, or
the
jinns? I guess
the jinn. I mean, the Quran talks about God created the angels, humans, and the jinn. Yes, we can talk about the jinn world or the demonic worlds. The way that the Zoroastrian scriptures designated as the counter powers. This is I think is the more accurate way to look at it. There are the forces of order, harmony, equilibrium, that we can, then symbolize with the term light, and then those forces of dissolution, subversion, decay, that are the forces of darkness. Now, each of these plays a role in the greater scheme of things, but on other levels, these are opposed. These forces are opposed simultaneously.
Well, in that case, I guess it might be helpful to get an example. So if we're looking at some of the forces in this war, right, a minute ago you were saying how there likely isn't a group that, gives out cards that say Illuminati and the member membership, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there has to be some way that you go from the non-physical into the physical, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we can talk about this demonic level, but still under them, there's going to be somebody actually, I don't know, making phone calls or walking around in a suit in Manhattan or something. And so do you imagine or that there are groups, they're just not called the Illuminati, or how do you imagine that?
Yeah, I think that is the case. I believe there is something like what most people understand by the term Illuminati, and this thing has been around for a very long time, maybe several thousand years. And in what these people would represent would be sort of conduits, conductors of the dark side, if you would. Kind of like, you have the narrative in the Star Wars universe, the Sith and the Jedi. One is channeling the light side of the Force, the other one the dark side of the Force. I think it is something analogous to that where you have, you have these projectors, these conductors of the dark side who are acting as agents of it within the world. And simultaneously for the other side as well, for the side of the light. That is also going on.
Well, I recently saw a picture of David Rockefeller, and looking into his eyes, I really felt like I could feel his soul. I think there are these forces of darkness out there. What groups they belong to is an open question, but there certainly seem to be these folks out there who are not motivated by money.
No.
This is the great lie of our time, is that everything is about money.
No.
And that certainly is not why you see a 90-year-old, guy dedicating himself night and day to some evil cause. It certainly isn't about money when these people have hundreds of millions of dollars or more. So basically you're seeing these groups, and then there's something that's akin to the Illuminati, but just not called the Illuminati, and there might be a whole bunch of them, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
And you think they may have been around for thousands of years.
Yes.
Speaking of that, in different traditions, let's say in the Sufi tradition or others, is there a thought of, like with the discussion of archons, I'm sure you've heard of that, that there's this Gnostic kind of idea that there's like a spiritual invasion, almost like a spiritual virus came to Earth. Do you have any thoughts on that kind of?
Well, that whole Gnostic narrative, with the archons that you find in Valentinian Gnosticism, this has a direct Zoroastrian genealogy. These are ideas that come from ancient Iran. They just articulated them differently in late antiquity. In Sufism, yes, there is. In Shiite Sufism, it is definitely there, like in what I explained, in this eternal battle between the forces of intellect and ignorance. But it isn't the case wherein that the darkness has always the upper hand. It cannot. It is in one sense you could say that the darkness is already always subdued. Yet in the three-dimensional plane of spatio-temporal matter, in this plane that we live in, it appears to have the upper hand because its own function is to materialize, to concretize more and more and more. Whereas the higher forces of the light or the universal intellect are, more subtle, more subtle. They act in a much more what's the word I'm looking for? In a more finessed kind of way, if you would. Mm-hmm. And the darkness can never subdue the light because ultimately the darkness in many ways is, in a sense, a shadow of the light. Mm. The saying that Satan is the ape of God. It's the same kind of reality that we're dealing with. But nonetheless, in these material spatial temporal realms, it messes with us. And in a sense, it has to because there's a greater test here. This is where the whole free will and predetermination come into play. It's, the reality of the dark side is in a sense put here by the ultimate in order to test humans for their own development, to choose the right, to choose the light. So it's like we're in an alchemical laboratory, if you would.
Right. Do you see it as like different societies could be doing better than others in this sense? In other words, perhaps at the moment the West is in decline, but Asia is going up? Or is this kind of a worldwide thing?
This is a worldwide thing. I mean, the thing I noticed about Asia is that current Asian civilization is not the Confucian civilization of even maybe 200-300 years ago, whether in Japan or China. Those traditional Confucian, Taoist, Zen values that guided these civilizations for several thousand years are not there. They have bought into the capitalist Western paradigm, but just with an Asian coloring. Now, the question is whether this will flower in a different direction once the East finally takes the mantle from the West or not. That remains to be seen. I don't know. I hope we live that long to see a Confucian revival in China and in Japan.
Yeah, me too. But what about how would we phrase it? Not just like East versus West, but how would you see society today versus, let's say, the Middle Ages in Europe or something? I mean, how would that?
Today, modern civilization is is a chaotic civilization on so many levels. Its order is a counterfeit order. It's not real order. Its symmetry is not real symmetry. It is a confused, almost schizophrenic kind of civilization. Whereas in the Middle Ages, or at least in the medieval Islamic world and in medieval China and Japan, there was more of a harmonious, medieval Japanese and Chinese and Islamic people had a more holistic, had a more greater approach to some of the very basic things of life, such as the appreciation of nature, of seeing the continuity and the continuum between nature and the divine worlds. Europe and the modern West, ever since Descartes, made that massive split in the psyche with his cogitor argument, has seen a complete separation between, the perception, the perceiver, and the perceived. And this has manifested over the last couple of hundred years in the kind of civilization that it has spawned. Which is where it's everything constantly falls apart. It's not real. It's fake. Whereas the real was more apparent in these civilizations of the past. And this is what any real traditionalist or anyone who is looking for a true traditionalist path needs to take into mind, that we are seeking the real here rather than the counterfeit.
Well, Wahid, it sounds like you should join me in our little revolt against the modern world.
Absolutely. May we be the men amongst the ruins, huh?
Exactly. We can have our little party in the ruins here.
Even if we go back to Plato, I mean, Plato sort of warned against these false realities that we have kind of perfected now. I mean, with his allegory of the cave, right?
Yes.
It seems like we're at a stage now where we're so far removed from reality that, Plato's probably rolling over in his grave right now.
Yeah. And the internet is a prime example of that. And the more, I'm also guilty of this to some degree. People live most of their social lives online,
Well, Wahid, you do have 1,000 friends, don't you?
Yeah.
Facebook friends. I didn't say friends, not real friends, just like ones and zeros on a computer screen. Yeah, well, speaking of that, Julius Evola stuff, I think we can get into, I guess the theme from him would be that modernism is really a terrible thing, that traditional values have been destroyed. And by traditional, of course, he doesn't mean 1950s Republicans in the United States, right? Because that's just one variation of the modern problem. Yeah. In fact, his famous essay was basically that Europe is caught between Bolshevism and an Americanism, and that both of those are disasters that have to be avoided. I guess then the question would be, why are they disasters? Why do you think?
Because they are completely materialized civilizations. It is matter becomes the value by which everything is measured. Previous civilizations, you always had an exchange, you had economies, there was currency, but the focus of these civilizations was not in the matter itself. It was not into material value itself. And the forces which obviously drive this from behind the scenes.
Well, actually, you could argue that communism, at least from the Soviet Eastern European way, fell because its religion, its God, collapsed. Right? It was based on material progress, more factories, more dams, more industrial production. And then, for whatever reason, it became corrupt and then stopped providing that. Right? And so what is a religion? What is a belief system if it, fails all around you? And in a sense, maybe the same thing is happening to American capitalism.
Yes.
It seems to be hitting the wall where the whole ideal is progress, right?
Yep.
And yet, is there any real progress?
No, of course not. Native American civilization in North America, before Europeans arrived, in many senses was far more advanced, at least in its perception of life in the greater perspective.
Sure. But I mean, even just in the American sense of, in its own terms, it's been hitting a wall, right? I mean, you could argue that American civilization peaked in the 1970s in so many ways, with all its faults. But I mean, I'm just saying that even on its own terms, it's kind of looks like it's hitting the wall. Right.
But the question is, on its own terms, was it ever consistent with these terms to begin with, or were there internal contradictions from the very beginning? And my argument is that that the American experiment was full of contradictions from the very Declaration of Independence. You can see it in that very first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. All men are equal, yet there are slaves and Native Americans that we consider to be non-human or subhuman, and women. On top of that, I mean, I'm not a liberal, but if you want to be consistent with that greater Enlightenment worldview of Locke and Voltaire, etc., that these American founding fathers tried to instill, they were inconsistent with that view. And de Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville, in his monumental Democracy in America, he pointed all this out. He was an aristocrat, a French aristocrat.
Well, then that gets into the question of whether America, the Enlightenment, and I guess you might say the French Revolution, whether they were really, how can we put it, were they good things?
Were they what we've been told?
Or have we been sold a bill of goods? Let me phrase it that way.
Yeah, My point of view is that the Enlightenment was a fraudulent experiment to begin with. I mean, people have speculated about the Masonic intent behind spawning these revolutions in the Americas and in France, etc. And I think a lot of that may be true to some degree, but the dissolutive force and dynamic behind this thing and the contradictions inherent in it are very seldom looked at. I mean, the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, is a good thing, is taken as an orthodox point of dogma by most secular liberals in the West. You cannot. This is the sacred cow that you cannot criticize. But once you look at it, even within the writings of someone like Locke, for example, which played such an important role in the thinking of these American founding fathers, the contradictions are enormous. What they wanted to do? You cannot have an equality that is only equal for a certain class. I mean, I don't believe a lot of the concepts that these people were pushing. But, there was no consistency in what they themselves were selling. And the question is whether they were aware of this or not. That is the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think a lot of them were actually operatives.
Yeah.
They had other agendas, like this whole hidden occult war. And a minute ago we were talking about Evola and the revolt against the modern world. And I mean, I think one of his famous sayings was along the lines of, how can I say it? He was against the subversion that was introduced into Europe by the revolutions of 1789 and 1848. And, you can't help but feel those had secret society, Illuminist kind of hands, fingerprints all over the place.
Yeah, of course they did.
And there's
been a lot of research on this, too.
Yeah, well, I did you ever read the book, what is it, Fire in the Minds of Men by Billington?
I've heard of, no, I haven't read it, no. I've heard about this book and cited it many times.
It's a classic book by a guy who was the Librarian of Congress, and I think actually like a flunky for the American, whatever you want to call it, Illuminist movement. Again, not that they have cards that, you know what I mean, but yeah. It's really very, very a grand magnum opus kind of thing. But anyway, the point would be that these revolutions, we were sold a bill of goods. They were not about liberty, fraternity, and so on and so forth. And actually, it's almost laughable to hear these terms to me because that isn't what they were about, and it definitely isn't what we got. So that's part of it. But I guess moving on with this whole idea of an occult war that's like above it is, I think people want to see what would be examples of it around them. How can we see that it's going on? Do you have any ideas on how we might
the mass media, the narratives people? The narratives of the mass media is one sore thumb example of the occult war in action. Where establishments are attempting to bamboozle mass populations with narratives that are patently untrue and can be demonstrated to be untrue.
Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, Charlie Hebdo, exactly. Yeah.
Aren't you Charlie or whatever?
I mean, what does this even mean,
Well, that anybody who's actually taken the time to do some research on what that magazine is and some of the stuff it's contained, I mean, it's really just disgusting, degenerate filth. And to me, it just stinks of an operation that's designed to sort of drive a wedge between Muslims and Christians or left.
No, not Christians.
Left.
The modern secular liberals of Europe.
Yeah.
Sure.
the imperial left, if you would, of Anglo-Europe. Yeah, that's what it's meant to do. But what people forget, and this is where historical consciousness is so important, is that in 1945-1946, Julius Streicher, a mid-level Nazi official, was hauled before the Nuremberg Tribunal and found guilty of crimes against humanity for a magazine that he published called Der Strömer that published almost identical kind of smut that this Charlie Hebdo published. Now, if this man was found guilty and the principle established at the court was that this sort of work was crimes against humanity, how is it that Charlie Hebdo is held aloft as the hero of free speech while Julius Streicher was hung at Nuremberg?
There's actually even a contemporary version of this story. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a French satirist that, wasn't attacking Muslims with satire. He was, of course, attacking Jews, and, that's unacceptable, whereas to attack Muslims is, fine, right? Or Christians is fine. And this guy got fired from his job. I think he might have been a cartoonist at Le Monde. And, he got fired.
I think he was a cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo itself.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and they fired him. He refused to retract his cartoon and apologize, and he was fired from the magazine.
Yeah, I mean, how can people look at that and not just shake their heads at the hypocrisy and absurdity? I mean, it's just mind-boggling. It's okay to criticize these guys and with disgusting, vile stuff, but, these guys over here are some type of sacred cow that, God forbid you mention them in a negative light in any way, right? Yep.
And I think it is a tragedy because, I subscribe to Guénon and Evola's perspective on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. I think they have the most mature view of what this document represents. I believe the Jews of the world are ultimately the ultimate patsies in this whole occult war. And they themselves don't even realize this. Some of them do, but not all of them. And these forces, with what they are generating currently, in this, cauldron that we're in at the moment, are almost by design trying to create a massive global backlash against world Jewry. And people got to kind of step back for a minute and ask themselves, why are they doing this? Because if there is a global conflagration between the West and the Muslim world, no one wins here. No one wins here.
It's always been my contention that the Jews, of all people, are more brainwashed than anybody, right?
They are. Unfortunately, they are.
They are very much brainwashed. Well, you look at some of the stuff written in the Talmud, and it's exactly. Extremely, extremely supremacist. I mean, it's worse than some of the Nazi ideology, right?
Oh, it is. It's actually that in a kind of a Semitic form. It is. I've had some very interesting email discussions with members of the Neturei Karta movement who are total anti-Zionists, and I've tried to kind of ask them about what they believe about the origins of Zionism maybe. And one gentleman I spoke to quite extensively over email said it outright to me that he believes that what world Zionism represents, the Zionist movement that came about at the end of the 19th century, that these are behind the scenes actually Sabbatian Frankists.
I was going to bring that up. I was going to see, okay.
Yeah.
I guess just, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but we just have a minor concern with Neturei Karta, and that is that they themselves are also Talmudic believers, right? Yes, so I think we have to be careful there as well.
We have to be careful with them as well. I've also criticized them quite heavily for this. But nevertheless, some of their perspectives on these sorts of issues, so who the Zionists are, is quite interesting to me. They, on the issue of the Talmud, they don't budge, so there's really not much to talk to them about that issue.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I think there's also another interview I heard with, I think his name was Rabbi Antelman, and he goes into this quite in depth, about Sabtai Zvi and how that is basically still kind of created a schism within Judaism.
I was
very much
that's like the understatement of the year there, Jerry. His book To Eliminate the Opiate is like the definitive book on how the modern Jewish world has been taken over and subverted by very sinister forces.
Yeah.
Okay, and it didn't happen 100 years ago either.
No.
Right? It's like 100 years ago or 130 or whatever it is, 150 years ago is when they kind of like rolled out they went public, so to speak, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's when they have, we're having a World Zionist Conference and we're going to do this, that, and the other. But, I mean, they'd been laying the groundwork for,
since Babylon.
Yeah. Since Babylon. Yeah, of course. But I mean, what I'm trying to say though is, if you read that book To Eliminate the Opiate, I think that since Sabbat Zvi, 1666 or whatever?
1666, yep. That's when he made his grand apostasy to Islam.
Was it June? What was it?
Yeah.
Was it June 6th?
Yeah.
No, June 18th. I think it was. For those who are into like sixes and all that, right? But nonetheless, the point is that's kind of where all of this came from. But yeah, Wahid, I'm with you. I think typical Jews are absolute victims of this. They've been victims all along, and it kind of begs the question why they can't see more clearly that they're victimized by this.
Because they're afraid. They don't know which way to go. I mean, I've tried to have conversations with some people I consider to be quite switched on about the whole Rothschild phenomena. And that this is not a conspiracy theory. This could be demonstrated with actual documentation that these people have had their hands in a lot of different pies that they just don't want to talk about. They walk away, because I guess that angle has been, at least in their eyes, besmirched by the anti-Semitic angle of it. But nevertheless, if it's true, it's true. If you can document it, you can document it. It doesn't change facts.
Hey, look, bad guys can be good at something. A good athlete or a good general or whatever can be a terrible person.
Yeah.
And a great person can be a terrible athlete or a terrible general, right?
There you go.
I mean, you should, people get their hopes up too much there, I think. Well, going on with that, the Sabbatean angle, I think, is important because if you ignore that, then it's, here we are discussing the occult war.
Yeah.
Right? If you discuss something like Zionism, just as an example, or Nazism, if you don't discuss the kind of the ground, the people behind the scenes, you're really, you're totally ignoring what's going on. And so I guess, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, in terms of the Iranian angle or the Middle Eastern angle, this would be really quite important.
Since we brought up the Sabbatians and the Zionists, okay, an angle in this greater occult war, at least where the Middle East is concerned, that almost nobody is looking at, where the genesis of Islamophobia actually may be. I tried to get Alex Jones interested in this several years ago. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, nor David Icke for that matter. Is that there is an organization that was spawned in the 1860s by direct British imperial aid, and who has its world headquarters in Haifa, Israel, and that this is a group calling itself a religion that the globalists are waiting for the right opportunity to roll out as the quote-unquote successor to Islam in the Middle East. And, of course, I'm talking about the Baha'is, the Baha'i faith, which is located in Haifa, Israel. I don't know if people can go online and look at the World Center. I'm talking about the main sect of the Haifan Baha'is. These people are everywhere. They were there also in Palestine before the Zionists formally arrived. Their leadership was almost a nexus to the world Zionist movement in Palestine before these Zionists arrived there, where they were sending all kinds of statements about the want of cooperation with these Zionist Jews. And during the First World War, the leaders of these Baha'is became the nexus of the British to undermine the Ottoman Turks and drive them out of Palestine at the time. And since that time, especially over the last 50 years, these people have found themselves everywhere. You will find them in finance, in banking, in government, in intelligence, in the corporate sector. I found all kinds of names of people in companies like Booz Allen Hamilton that Edward Snowden came out of. And this cult, aka organization, New World Order religion, has its hand in a lot of this stuff, in generating this narrative of Islamophobia, in trying to bring a conflict between the West and Israel against Iran specifically, because they want to replace Islam, at least in Iran, with themselves. And that is an agenda they have articulated many times publicly. And this is part of this the story of the occult war where the Middle East is concerned. But no one wants to touch this.
I always thought that the globalists or world controllers or power that be, whatever you want to label, the people at the top of the pyramid, It seems to me like in most sectors they, float 3 or 4 or 5 different trial balloons, right? And maybe that's plan B or plan C. I don't know, but it's definitely part of the plan in one spectrum or another.
Yeah. Hey, Wahid. Since we're being so painfully politically incorrect there, I can't top what you said, although it's all true. I thought Lawrence of Arabia was their main saint. Just kidding. But they're made in England. How's that?
Yeah, made in England.
Made in England. And Haifa, that's where they belong. If the city of London if the rent is too high, then they belong in Haifa because it's cheaper. That's kind of my way. But there's another group that at the peak of the British Empire got created that was in the western U.S. that was to contribute to breaking up the U.S. and it's a similar operation with similar, totally feeling. They could switch one from the other, and maybe they do. Maybe that's why places like Booz Allen is they have to say, well, are you a B or an M? And some of them are both, right? But so now I'm going to really get a lot of flack over this one. This show will be banned in Boston for sure.
Then you've got the other ones that start with S that are within the film industry very prominently.
Well, that one's harder to that's kind of harder to find the genesis in London. That kind of has the feeling of like naval intelligence all over it. You know what I mean? It's kind of got that feeling that admirals are all over it. But anyway, the other two definitely have that the City of London feeling from top to bottom. Wahid, there's no question. That's what they are. But these are just operations. I don't think they're anything new. I don't know that, I assume they happened 1,000 years ago or, whenever, ever since this spiritual war has been going on. It's just that we can trace these because they're so, visible today, right?
Yeah.
They're not even hidden. And as a matter of fact, if you look at it, you can even find the publishers, so to speak. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, who's funding them? Because they're 501c3 charities. And we can, to some extent find out where they're coming from. But, that for sure is an important group in the Middle East. And amazingly not discussed, right? In the American media.
I don't understand this. Because in the American or in the Western media, it's understandable because they are part of the establishment there. I don't understand why people like Jones or Ike, and similar don't want to discuss this group. Because these people are everywhere. They're right center in all of these ecumenical religious movements, which right there should raise everybody's flags. And on it goes in banking, in government,
Well, Wahid, I laughingly a minute ago said this interview is going to be banned in Boston, right? Well, a lot of people don't want to have their videos banned. You know what I mean? I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but sure. People choose their battles, and I'm not trying to give anyone a hard time about that.
Sure.
But
just remember what Voltaire says,
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Find out who you can't talk about. Yep. You can talk about, unknown German death cults a little bit more than you can talk about that place that has a headquarters in Haifa. Yeah. Yes, I know where you're coming from. Believe me, I know where you're coming from. But anyway, moving on a little bit. I think, though, with the Middle East, that's an example of something that's totally not discussed, right? There are all these people in the West who think they're experts in the Middle East, and they know nothing about that.
No.
Isn't that amazing?
That is unbelievable to me,
Right? A taxi driver, and they tend to be conspiracy theorists in the Middle East, a taxi driver in Cairo is going to know about them. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's kind of amazing that you can have a PhD in this stuff here in the West and not know anything about it, and a taxi driver could tell you all day long about them.
Some taxi drivers in the Middle East are probably better political analysts than all the news networks in the U.S. combined. And also taxi drivers are probably better sources of information, primary source information than a lot of these pundits as well.
Yeah. Hey, since we're talking about the Middle East, I think we ought to get back to that big terrorist thing in Paris, because that just happened. And that could lead to a lot of unpleasant things. People are talking about, more wars in the Middle East, or even a ginned-up civil war in Europe, or at least France. Well, you're in Germany. What do you've got your heart on the pulse of, what's going on in Europe. What do you see happening?
Well, what I've been seeing happening over the last 12 months, there was this movement Pegida. Originally came about as a movement, kind of as to rail against the establishment and the fact that it's giving in, as it were, to the Anglo-Americans on things like the Transatlantic Trade Agreement. And since last year, the focus of Pegida has changed significantly. And as of recently, it's become formally a kind of a anti-immigrant party, if you would. And to me, that's a sign of other hands, kind of directing this movement away from its original purpose. And this is very troubling. And it also now, with what's happened in Paris, this new focus of Pegida has been kind of given a new lease of life. I mean, I walked the streets of Berlin, and people maybe up until 3-4 months ago who wouldn't feel bad vibes from are now, a little different than they were even a few weeks ago. And this is very troubling to me, very troubling to me, because it tells me that there is something very bad being socially engineered here.
Wahid, I don't want to insult you because I know that you're actually an immigrant yourself, but from my perspective, and I know we've had discussions about this privately, it seems to me that immigration in Europe has actually been weaponized, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that to insult, Muslims.
No. I'm not. I've spoken about this myself. It has been weaponized. This is fact. They can't doubt it.
So, I mean, what's the solution here? Certainly
end of imperialism, end of Western colonialism. That is the only solution. Less dependence on the oil and the energy from the Middle East. Less undermining of governments and systems in the Middle East, and on and on it goes. The solution is very simple.
Hey, but let me interrupt there. Because, it's weaponized, but it's not just like to bring in Africans or Arabs, right? It's wiped out Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it has. They've
all got to move to London.
Yeah.
Right? And, it's also wiping out places like Portugal, but I'm just saying this weapon is not simply like about bringing in Muslims or something.
No, it's about destroying the local cultures.
It's about breaking down any coherence in the society. Yeah. And this is a point of this occult war too.
Yeah, right? Absolutely, it's a point. It's a central point.
It's a central element of this occult war is when you say that there's some hidden policy to uproot people.
Mm-hmm.
The average American, and it may be the same in Europe, may have trouble imagining that. Right? What is that? Because it isn't immediately obvious where the money is, right? But I think you can make the case that one of the war aims around the world is to displace people.
Absolutely, because then they're better consumers.
Right, because there will be no culture that isn't McDonald's.
Exactly.
But again, it's not even about the money of McDonald's, though. It's about the cultural control. It's the control of their spirits.
Yeah.
Well, from every angle you look. From every angle we look at the immigration policies of the West, they're just mind-bogglingly stupid. On the one hand, you've got all these people lobbying for free abortion and everything, and then on the other hand, you've got essentially open borders that bring in people from all over the world, right? And a lot of these people are unskilled, uneducated, and really can't assimilate very well into the culture. The policies... I don't know how anyone can make an argument that they're actually, good policies.
They are not good policies. But
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wahid. Okay, then I got a question. Not knowing much about Europe, but it seems to me that some countries have done a better job of integrating immigrants than others, right? So my image is that the Turks are much better integrated into Germany than, for example, North Africans are into France.
That's true. Yeah.
Now, we could also argue that the culture of Turkey is more, subject to, working in factories and, you know what I mean, that it's a closer fit for Germany than North Africans ever were for France. But that kind of begs the question. France stands out to me as a particularly failed immigration system, immigration policy. I mean, way worse than, again, let's say Germany. And you have to ask why. Again, we're going to assume that they're not stupid, that they have a reason. And what do you think? Why is it so bad in France? Why have they been doubling down on policies that they should have abandoned?
Well, when you had this massive influx of North Africans, especially the Algerians that came to France towards the tail end of the war, there was policies of ghettoizing these North African immigrants. I think this is part of the problem when you have these immigrants that are ghettoized, and then by the same token, the local French, there were all the resentments and all the usual things that come with that kind of thing. And now this has come to a boiling point, where, there's on the one hand, people are radicalized, are resentful, all the usual things that happen in such a situation. Then on the other hand, the French deep state is cultivating actively these lunatics, these takfiris, sending them to places like Libya and Syria, etc., and then bringing them back and letting them run riot in the streets of Paris. And the only explanation I have, go ahead. And the
Civil War?
This is about because you don't see any kind of a consistent policy from the French church about the immigration issue. I don't know if anybody from the church in France has come out to try something.
Do they have a church?
Yeah, of course the Catholic Church is still in France. They're large, sizable Catholic population. But all of the policies that are being handed down are by the social engineers. And the social engineers are, instead of solving the problem or finding ways of integrating these immigrants that are not going to put them in ghettos, etc., they're exacerbating it deliberately, in some cases. The Germans are much, much better. The Germans do try to integrate people. They insist, for example, if people are going to get any kind of a full immigration studies, that they have at least some working knowledge of German. They put them through integration courses, etc. And in fact, I think that not that it's a raving success, but it's a much more sane policy that the Germans are implementing. And plus, I think the Germans are much better, more consistent people than the French in some regard. There's my bias, my pro-German bias there.
I'm not sure. Have you guys seen the online interview with Barbara Lerner Specter?
I haven't. I've heard about this though.
Yeah. Well, okay. So my belief is that the usual suspects, let's just call them, are largely those responsible for weaponizing immigration to essentially destroy Europe. Now, on the same note, this same group is fomenting a war between traditional Europeans and Muslims. And a lot of the blowback to this war that they're fomenting is blowing back onto their own people.
Yeah.
And I half wonder if that's actually by design to sort of scare their society to a certain place in the Middle East. And I was wondering what you thought about that, Wahid.
I think that's pretty obvious. It's pretty self-evident that is what's happening, because it's a control mechanism.
So it's a feature rather than a defect, let's say.
Yeah. It's a feature. This is by design. They're doing it deliberately. Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think is likely to come out of the French troubles?
It is scary because from what I'm reading and the people I'm talking to, I mean, we are looking, if another incident happens, we will be very close to what happened here in Germany in the 1930s.
What about, do you think that this is going to get Le Pen's party in?
Probably. This is the vote getter, definitely.
And what are your thoughts on Le Pen's party?
I am not impressed with Marine Le Pen or the Front National at all, to tell you the truth. My views are very similar to Alain Soral, who used to be a Front National member, actually. And he's very astute in pointing out the fact that, that the way that the party is lumping all Muslims and the whole immigrant problem in a very, simplistic way, rather than, being able to solve the problem, is exacerbating the problem. But for Marine Le Pen and the Front National, this is a vote getter. So the more that they play the xenophobia and Islamophobia and all that sort of thing, the more votes they're going to get, especially in the situation we have right now. Whereas, a consistent policy would even try to bring in Muslims potentially into the Front National. Maybe have a Muslim composed of Shiite Muslims or Sunni Muslims who don't particularly follow this Takfiri Wahhabi line, but they don't want any part of that. That's not their policy.
Well, now we get to the question of, are they real, quote unquote? Right.
Le Pen.
I have grave doubts that
she's
she's compromised, and there's too much good publicity about her in some places to make me. But like you're saying, Alain Soral with Dieudonné, the comedian, I think that anyway, we could go on forever about it, but it does raise questions. It looks like this is they've created an unsolvable mess.
Yeah.
That was the goal. And if you break things down into voting patterns, you don't have any choices no matter how bad they are. But at the same time, I'm really concerned because you see what they did in the Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay,
you have, just a few days ago, torch marches in Kiev, right? Right? This is looking ugly. This is not looking like it's going in a positive way.
And what is bizarre about the current generation of fascism rising in Europe is that it is Zionist friendly too. Geert Wilders, ally of Marine Le Pen's, is outright a stooge of Israel's and the Zionist lobby in Europe.
And then you've got Kolomoisky in Ukraine and the Israel lobby getting behind them, which again kind of might tie back to my previous point about scaring Jews to immigrate into Israel may be part of the plan all along, right?
Yeah. Right, and Dmitry Yarosh is actually rumored to come from a Ukrainian Jewish family. The Yaroshes apparently are Ukrainian Jews.
As I've heard the same thing about Yatsenyuk and also Poroshenko. So more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess, as the saying goes.
There you go. But the target this time are Muslims rather than Jews.
Yes, although the Jews in Europe could also find themselves in a very awkward position because, if you're radicalizing, if you're attacking Muslims, and now there are huge numbers of Muslims in some countries, and then at the same time, like in the Ukraine, where you have such a high percentage of the leadership of really very fascistic, governmental types or agencies or systems, you shouldn't be surprised if there's a backlash. Right.
Let me
put it this way. Kolomoisky, the governor in Dnipropetrovsk, he is I think he was the head of the World Jewish Congress at one point. He might still be the head of it. He's built the largest synagogue in Europe in his town. And that Pravi sector, the right-wing group that's most famous, they're guilty of every kind of atrocity imaginable in the current war. Even against children, right? Just speaking on a human level, if your kid or your brother got tortured and killed for no, even not even in the fight, right, in the war. And there's this fanatically pro-Zionist guy funding the whole thing. I mean, just on a human level, you're going to be tempted to want revenge.
Yeah.
Right?
That is the
and
law
I'm not
consequence.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that when you radicalize the situation, the losers... Yeah, well, anyway, everybody can understand this. It's just, this is why you shouldn't allow things to get radicalized, and that's why this terrorist stuff in Paris is so dangerous, is you have unassimilated people all over the place living in ghettos, and this could just get awfully ugly. I get the feeling that this is coming across as France's 9/11. I don't know if that's...
This is how they're selling it right now. They tried doing the same with Sydney last month. But with Sydney, because it was only one guy and only two victims, once there was a bit of separation, a bit of lapse in time, people began to kind of like back away from that. But in France, this is what they're actively doing. They're trying to make it into the 9/11 of France.
Well, somebody actually said the other day, I think, on my Facebook friends, said, how do we predict the next false flag? And I said, well, it's pretty easy. You take out a map of the NATO countries and you start coloring in the ones that have already had one of these events. Yeah. And, the ones that haven't been colored in yet.
Hey, Jerry, that's, you gotta there are external factors, like if Norway,
if they vote
recognizes Palestine, or they withdraw their, $1 trillion oil fund from the City of London, then for the next 3 months, it's like Terror Code Red or Super Dark Red, right?
Well, here in Germany, this is actually transpiring. This is what my greatest fear is, that the next one will happen here. Because there is a sizable part of the German establishment, not Merkel's CDU, the Christian Democrat, but we're talking about the captains of industry, some of the old Social Democratic Party leaders, etc., who are Eurasianists, and they are really up in arms in the policy that Merkel has put Germany in. And they've been trying to pull Germany away from this Atlanticist bloc. And if they get any further, you will have Paris on steroids happening here in Berlin.
I'm curious now. From my perspective, most of these events certainly have, let's say, the Atlanticist flavor to them, right? I wonder if we might not see some with, say, a Eurasian flavor. I mean, is it impossible that ex-KGB type people could not pull some of these things off?
Of course they could, but the question is, qui bono, who benefits from such events?
Well, I don't know, but if Merkel had a heart attack tonight, I would say that Russia would benefit. Maybe yes. I'm wrong, but you're asking, right?
Well, her replacement, which is her deputy, wouldn't be any better. In fact, that woman would probably be even far worse.
But there'd have to be an election or something, and so actually within 4 months, Russia would benefit, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jerry's question is totally legit. And this has been mine. Let's put it this way: those who are opposed to the Anglo-American system of world domination, which you can call Eurasian, but it's broader than that, right? It includes people in Latin America or whatever. Yeah. I would say that, just looking at Putin or some of the people he's been working with, it comes across as relatively passive in this sense, right? It's like, let America wear herself out, right? And you wonder if, for example, allowing the war in Libya wasn't a calculated thing. I don't know. I mean, the official story is that Medvedev's faction and Putin's faction didn't agree, and Medvedev was the president, and anyway, that they went along with that, and supposedly they were deceived. But that's hard to buy for me. I think you could tell, looking at Hillary Clinton, that blood was going to come as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Right. She's in that djinn movement.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Living djinn.
But anyway, what do you think about that? I mean, do you feel that the Eurasian people are a little passive or
I think they are too passive. Unfortunately, there's a dynamic that is making this in this way at this time, because within Russia itself, from my understanding, and my friend Joaquin Flores knows this much better than I, but there are the actual Eurasianists in government are kind of besieged by this whole sea of liberal fifth columnists who are either fence-sitters or outright, Atlanticists within the system. And Eurasianism is kind of at least ideologically, it's still developing. There isn't, most Russians can kind of vaguely get their head around this, and they're probably in agreement, but those who control the levers of the system, the ones like the actual oligarchs in the background, Putin has not completely won his fight against these people yet. And so he has to tread carefully, because it's not so much the Atlanticists themselves that are the problem, it's these people within the system that are the problem.
Well, I would say that it's not simply an issue of Eurasian thought, though.
No.
In other words, it's an issue of your national interest being at risk, right? I mean,
but my question is, what could Russia have possibly benefited from allowing Gaddafi and Libya to go like that? Because had there not been that that NATO operation in the fall of Gaddafi, in fact, Gaddafi would have naturally aligned with Russia, and as that was going to happen. And if he had managed to do the same thing in Africa that Putin and the Chinese are trying to do elsewhere with the BRICS, we would have been that much closer to this multipolarism right now.
And not only that, but Libya really, I don't think, took a whole lot of effort from NATO or the West. I mean, it's not like Afghanistan or Iraq where they got bogged down and kind of got grinded down by the resistance, right?
Yeah, it was a blitzkrieg, basically.
Right,
They didn't threw their own people in there and then bombed the hell out of the place.
Yeah, they farmed it out to the Saudi mercenaries, let's say.
Yeah, but I mean, look, we can all have our theories, and I agree. I think it's part of this issue that Russia's divided at the top.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this has always been Russia's problem: is the majority of the people of the elite like the West, and the majority of the people don't, or something like that, right? But I would say that, just speaking on harsh terms, though, you could find interests in Russia that could say it's not all bad to do this. First of all, you can suspect that the enemies of Libya offered huge bribes or offers of deals in things like the UN or whatever that mattered, right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so that's the first thing, is there might be $10 billion in, Medvedev's bank account or whatever. And then that, 90% of that goes out to his friends. But that's one possibility. But then setting that aside, there are other just interests. Oil production.
Yes.
Is going to be destroyed. So oil prices are going to be $10, $15, $20 a barrel higher for X number of years than they otherwise would be.
Yes.
Because it's an inelastic market, right? I mean, as we see with prices, that overshoot on the high side or overshoot on the low side, right? So you're talking about, from a Russian national interest point of view, 5 years of an extra $20 a barrel or something.
Yep.
That's a lot of money. That money, some of it's going to go.
That probably sweetened the deal. Sure.
I'm just trying to say you can also argue that it totally discredited the idea to neutral viewers around the world, like let's say China or something, Brazil, that Western interventions are like morally based or rationally based, right? It's such a disaster that, you can never with a straight face, Henri Levy can never with a straight face talk about human rights somewhere, right? That's right. If the U.S. now all of a sudden feels that, Armenia or something, needs the UN or whatever, it won't go anywhere.
No.
Right. So I'm just saying you could say that they had some interest that did profit to some extent, but I think overall it was a losing deal. I think it was a big mistake.
It was a losing deal. But I think they miscalculated. I think, they miscalculated big time. They didn't really perceive, although they'd gone through that whole Georgia thing already, they really didn't believe, the belligerence of these Atlanteans to the degree that they then showed themselves last year with Ukraine. they really didn't believe it. So they went along with the deal. And that was a mistake because, had they stuck to their guns in 2011, we would not be here right now. This much closer.
So
global conflagration.
What do you guys think about the idea that we're moving from an occult war to, I guess, a more visible war?
I pray every day, my man. I pray every day, to all the forces of the universe. We don't need another catastrophic global war. May there be cooler heads that prevail because this, if it comes, and I fear that it may come, this thing will be catastrophic. I mean, we can't even conceive how bad this thing will get. Because we're talking about the use of nuclear weapons this time.
Well, or maybe even something much worse.
Much worse.
God knows what they've got, in their underground bunkers in Moscow or Langley or wherever, right?
Well, if you're talking about that, though, what would these forces of darkness want from a war? What might...
Complete destruction.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you looked at World War II as the template, right, is it the destruction of, 20% of the people on Earth that they're looking for, or is it a degradation of society?
All of the above.
End of traditional values.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there's the famous story of Pike and Mazzini and all that about setting up a war in the Middle East, right, to discredit religion.
Yes.
Right? That's a possibility. I mean, that would certainly qualify as traditionalism, right, the traditional Abrahamic religions.
This
but
is
it would
ISIS
also
represents, what they're trying to do with ISIS.
Yes, and I'm afraid that this terrorism in France may give them the ability to go try to attack ISIS more seriously, even though it's a fake.
I think France had already, the day before, I think they had sent an aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean, I believe.
Yeah, I read about this myself. Yeah.
Well, there's another angle. Oh, sorry, Jerry, in a second.
Ahead,
Let me
Paul.
finish this. There's one other angle to that, though. Hollande is perceived, he's unpopular and weak, right? And there's talk that Sarkozy will challenge him, right? Now, Sarkozy is from a CIA family, the Wisners.
Yes.
And is a, hardcore Zionist type and, warmongering type. And so even though we may not like Hollande, it could get a lot worse. And that might be one of the things out of this, is you can talk about Marine Le Pen. Okay, that party, her party might do well, but what matters is the one, to some extent, is who controls the military.
Yes.
And if it's Sarkozy, we're not going to be happy.
No.
France is
because
going to
there will be outright intervention militarily by the French.
All over the place.
All over the place, yeah.
I mean, the only thing I think that would restrict them is that the French military has been integrated with the British military. They hardly can function without each other. The jets and ships and everything, supplies and stuff like that. But that's no problem because it's not like Britain is remotely pacifist, right? They'll just agree that you want to do this war and we want to do this one, so we'll do them both.
Yeah.
Right? You get every colony that you used to have in Africa, you get them back. And we get, whatever it is they want. So I think this could be pretty ugly. And so I think you got to think about that, is that even if Le Pen does okay or does well, yes, but if Sarkozy comes in, you're going to get all the war and police state imaginable. Jerry, sorry I interrupted you there. What was your question?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a bit of a segue and maybe a little bit off topic, but I'm curious, Wahid, are you familiar with Rudolf Steiner's material at all?
Absolutely, yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering what your take was. I mean, he's kind of got this theory that civilization or society kind of has two impulses, one sort of towards a Luciferic type force, which is more like, I guess you could say, spiritual, sort of more traditional, and the diametrically opposed drive would be to the mechanistic Ahriman type
Sure.
force. I was wondering how you thought that might fit into the Occult War, if you even see that it does.
Yeah, it does. I actually mentioned it. This is I don't like some of the terms that Steiner used. I think generally Steiner is a good guy. But the way I look at it, using those terms or using different terms for the same concept, you're looking at the force of order versus chaos. These are exactly the same kind of thing. And chaos being the materialization, this reign of quantity versus the reign of quantity, which is the higher order of the spirit, as it were. That definitely plays into the whole of modern civilization is the reign of quantity, progressively.
Yeah, I guess using the term Lucifer sort of turns a lot of people off, but
yeah, I know what he means by it. I don't like the terminology. Yeah.
No, and I agree. I guess we could say more of a drive towards the spiritual and a drive towards the mechanistic might be better terms. Yeah. All right, I just wanted.
Well, we're definitely on the cusp of absurd mechanistic technical approaches and solutions. Right? The idea that you now have transhumanists, I mean, people that you can find on YouTube who are in serious positions, professors at Stanford or whatever, right? Who can come out and say, I want to put my essence in a chip in a machine and, keep it like in a server farm somewhere so I can live forever, ha ha ha. Right? I mean, this kind of stuff, I mean, are they serious?
Yeah, they're serious.
See, that's the problem, is they are serious, and so when you see a science fiction movie, Elysium or something, right, the elite want to live on their little floating, things in the sky or at the L5 points or something, right, and then they have robot police while we're down here in prison, right?
Are you guys saying you don't want a Kissinger or Brzezinski that lives forever? Come on, guys.
I'm not sure. Are you saying they don't? I thought that they're like, that's what we're talking about. There's that line between Jin and Hillary, right? And just as you get slightly above Hillary, that's where you get them.
That's where you get
people like Kissinger or Rockefeller. Yeah. I'm not sure they die. Aren't they like Saint Germain or something?
Well, I think that what was left of the Kissinger maybe will be dead, but that Jin is going to be there for quite
a long time. Is unkillable, right?
Yeah,
he'll be writing books for as long
as he can.
Yeah, that's the problem. But well, of course, now we're getting back into the whole alchemical thing, and we could talk about that too. Is that when you talk about the occult war, then you have to get into what would be occult purposes. Right? In other words, when you say war, right, you think okay, the Nazis versus the Soviets, right? That's a war, right?
Sure.
But when there's an occult war, who's fighting and why are they fighting? What are the goals they're trying to achieve, right? And so, if you're in some secret society that wants to achieve, let's say, the transmutation of matter, right, or going to the moon or something like that, right? You could have a purpose that the average person couldn't relate to at all.
No. Basically,
and so, what do you think some of their purposes might be?
Well, this is the way one breaks it down. If you look at, what does each secret society, what are they actually doing? And they're practicing some form of, for lack of a better word, magic, right?
Right.
Now, magic has to be divided into two branches. It's a light and dark side. There's theurgy and there's goetia, right? Theurgy deals with the upper worlds. It's about cultivating the self towards a transition or a transformation, what they call a palingenesis, towards the higher worlds, to become more and more one with the Godhead or the angelic realm, etc. Whereas the goetic side is to basically use the demonic forces of the dark side to control this realm itself, to transmute matter for its own sake within this realm, rather than to transmute matter for a higher purpose beyond this world. And once these two dichotomies are properly understood, then you know what each is doing and what the goal of each is. Theurgy however, is of a higher order, so theurgy can cancel out the goetic, right? Unfortunately, there aren't that many real theurgers left in the world, and we're left with a lot of goetic black sorcerers out there. We're all about control.
Well, that's because we're in a dark age.
We're in a dark age. And this is also because of a lack of understanding of the nature of power. Real power is dynamic, it is expanding, it is ultimate freedom. Whereas the understanding of these dark societies or dark brothers, etc., is about control. Control contracts, whereas power expands. Power belongs to God. God is free. God creates. God doesn't have a hidden agenda. Whereas these guys are just wanting to control. And this is also then can be mapped out with the quality, quantity dichotomy at the same time.
Don't forget the Goetic path was also the easier path, and I guess in the short term.
Yeah, it's the easier path. Yeah.
You don't have to do, you don't really have to cultivate yourself so much. You're
no.
more
but in
relying.
the deals that you make, you risk things such as possession. And a lot of these people are possessed, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, and I've read quite extensively on this, and one of the, whether people want to believe this or not is up to them. But apparently, I can't remember who wrote this, but they had conjured one of these entities. Mm. And, one of the things that they conjure them for is to question them and get access to knowledge they can't normally get access to. Mm. And he asked the entity if, because normally I guess when these beings are conjured, they act frightening and, like they're upset that they were disturbed and so forth. And he questioned this entity, and the entity said, that that's essentially just an act, and that they actually are happy that they're conjured because that gives them sort of an in to the magician.
Exactly. So there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, it's the old Faustian legend, right?
There you go. Yeah. Faust is actually in my opinion, it's actually a grimoire rather than a fairy tale.
Yes, I think isn't it basically like the truth,
it's based on
kind
a true
of fictionalized.
Story.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's kind of like, the fictional version of Manly Hall's discussion, or I don't know, something. It seems awfully knowledgeable.
Exactly.
Not to put too detailed on it, but yeah, that really is quite a thought that they're dealing with this. But I think then that we got to ask, okay, this has been going on a long time. And I think we really have entered a period of great decay. Mm-hmm. The last couple of 100 years. I mean, we were talking about Zionism and Bolshevism, but really, since the Enlightenment, almost all of the isms, don't you think? Darwinism seems really contrived. You know what I mean? We could go on. A lot of these isms have been to take us away from our purpose or who we are and what we are. And at the same time, look at how everything has been degraded. I would say language. If you read different people discussing how dictionaries have changed or how words have changed in the last 100 or 200 years, I think you'll see we're spinning things in a bad way. What would be an example? Words that might and ideas that might have a certain nuance. Things get changed, like manliness versus masculinity or something. There's a real push to degrade everything, I think.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't aware of it. And again, when you're living your life, it's hard to pay attention. But I think that this is no accident. I think there's a group that is working hard to degrade us. And I would like to think there's a group out there working hard to elevate us.
Yeah, well, it's not even a group. There's a force out there to degrade us, and there's a force out there to elevate it. And I would recommend people who really want to know the narrative is to go get a copy of René Guénon's The Reign of Quantity and the Sign of the Times, and to really study what he says in this book. This is a great map of understanding what we are dealing with in our times, I think.
Do you believe, Wahid, and I don't know if this is an Islamic belief as well or not, but do you believe there's such a force as the Great White Brotherhood?
Well, possibly. Possibly there's a Great White Brotherhood, but, from my point of view, it's not even the material brothers that one should be seeking. One needs to seek the real forces above them. So for lack of a better word, the angelic realm, or malakut, as we call it in Islamic mysticism. But yeah, I think there possibly is such a thing. Yeah. And it's not contradictory to at least Sufi understandings.
Yeah, again, it could exist on some type of spiritual level, whereas I would say the Great Black Brotherhood probably incarnated in Washington or something, or Tel Aviv. I don't know.
Yeah.
Washington, not Rome or London,
Tel
New
Aviv.
York, Manhattan. Oh, come on, that's a modern thing. Rome goes back a long time.
They've probably got a man everywhere, Paul.
Yeah. Of course, they've got their men in Havana, so to speak. They've got their agents all over. But that's actually, we're falling prey into looking for the specifics when it's kind of this force all over the place, right?
Yeah. And this is what Azal actually in that chapter of Men Amongst the Ruins, basically warns about. If you're looking out for actors, you're actually missing the plot. To understand the plot, it's not that difficult to figure it out. You don't need to know the actors. Because once you know the plot, then what is the weaponry to fight it, becomes the real question. How do we fight the occult war? Or how do we fight Dark Brothers? How do we fight this mass Goetia on this planet at the moment? And that is the real question to answer.
It's funny
because...
Well,
also, how do we not get trapped? Because when you look at the traps that they lay for us, as a practical matter, it's awfully hard to get out. Like, if you look at current messes, whether it's the immigration in France or the mess in the Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. If you were living there, what could you do as a practical matter? Right? I mean, if there's a war going on around you, I mean, you have to try to, save yourself and your family and eat.
Get out,
Right?
Yeah.
And if it, push comes to shove, gets ugly enough, like the Nazis versus the Soviets, the only option is to win the war on the ground, right? There is no alternative. I mean, some lucky ones got to run to Switzerland or something. But you know what I'm trying to say is once they get us hooked in a trap far enough, there's no good way out.
True, but there is a way, people, modern people basically dismiss this, but a real valid spiritual practice, is probably the most important thing that any conscientious human being right now can use. This is the weaponry, to pray every day, to have some form of ritual in your life, something that is constantly, even as a symbolic act, consecrating your life. Okay, this is the way at least you push out the occult influence of this.
I think that's good, but that's
go.
for your spirit, and that's good because then it puts you in the right frame of mind for dealing with things.
Yeah.
But as far as reality on the ground, to the people in Paris at the moment, you know what I mean. It's still kind of ugly. You have to, I think this is what I think it's time to leave. At least I myself and my family are seriously thinking of leaving Europe and maybe resettling back in Iran, where I was born. Because, this is getting bad here right now, and they're deliberately stoking it. And, 2 years ago, if you had said this to me, I would have laughed. But now, the vibe is very much the 1930s and 1940s. They want to do this all over again, and this time with Muslims. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry to hear about that. I guess, with that happening, when you travel around Europe, what is the vibe that you get? Not just on the Muslim front. Do you feel like there's a war coming on the distance?
People are on edge, it's not even a Muslim thing at all. Just people are on edge.
That's what I mean.
Happy. Yeah.
And the situation in the Ukraine is not about Muslims at all, obviously.
No.
And I don't know. I haven't been, in Europe lately, and I don't know. But I have talked to a number of Europeans, and they feel the economy is really doing poorly all over.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're not at all optimistic. They see all kinds of trouble coming.
Well, remember, Hitler came to power in 1933, just at the time that the German economy was on the verge of implosion, because of the Great Depression and the fall of Wall Street. And one would think that this whole fertile ground that brought a Hitler figure and his NSDAP to power is being deliberately set up. They want something like this to come back. Maybe I don't think it's even the Front National, La Pen or whatnot, but they want this back. They want this back here in Europe.
Well, again, in the spirit of this discussion of the occult war, it's not even a question of whether the figurehead who comes up, I don't even know, you know what I mean? It's not like even whether the person's good or bad. It's the policy of chaos and tension.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so, in that spirit of Evola's discussion, I mean, it's kind of like we're dealing with the force of chaos.
Yes.
Right? Violent chaos is what they're trying to create. And that's what you have right now in the Ukraine. And perhaps it's what's coming to the streets of Paris.
Yes.
Right? And in that environment, the average person who probably doesn't meditate or pray very much and watches TV 7 hours a day, right, is going to be very subject to the worst influences.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to be super optimistic about this looking at it. But I don't know. I don't know. You know, when I visit the States, I get this general view of tension.
Mm-hmm.
People are under too much stress compared to 20 or 30 years ago. What about in Europe?
That might just be part of the modern life too. Again, we're so disconnected from nature and spirit, I guess.
People are working too much, not taking care of themselves. They don't meditate. They don't pray. They don't reflect even. You know.
Hey, I've got one more quick question before we wrap up. Why do you, like in the West, it seems like Ebola has really been marginalized and demonized, for lack of a better word. Why do you think that is?
Because they tried to impugn upon Ebola that he was a fascist, and actually Ebola was not a fascist. He never joined the Italian National Fascist Party. You know, he had, because of his occult and esoteric interests, he had briefly connections with the SS. And one of the departments that was doing occult research was briefly employed by them at the end of the war. And it was also because of them that he lost. He was actually hit by a Soviet a shrapnel that put him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So the imputation is that Ebola's ideas are fascist, whereas Ebola was actually a critic of both Nazism and fascism. He's got two essays that people should read. One is a critique of National Socialism, and the other one was of Mussolini's fascism. But that's basically the reason. He was also a critic, a very harsh critic of the Nazi racial ideas. He thought that this was just too, simplistic and materialistic conception of race. That race really was a spiritual reality rather than a material one. But nevertheless, yeah.
Oh, sorry, carry on, Wahid.
But nevertheless, they brushed him with the Nazi and fascist brush, and he was relegated to,
well, I think that's one way of describing it, but I think there's another issue. Jerry, he is attacked so much because he, in a sense, was criticizing. I mean, he was getting to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. He was saying that the problem, in other words, you're looking at a solution, and is it Mussolini? Is it Hitler? Is it, Stalin? Is it Roosevelt? Right? And he's saying you're approaching things in the wrong way.
Yes. That's
right. These guys are offering you different variations of mechanistic, of the same thing. Mm-hmm. Right? The American version has, better background music. Right? It has better sales pitches in Hollywood, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean? And the German version, Hitler's version, has much better marches.
Yeah.
Right? The boots look better too, right?
Yeah. Do you want the pink cyanide or the blue cyanide?
Blue cyanide.
And Mussolini, well, what can you say? He's Italian, so, you got the good and the bad from Italy, right? And then Stalin, well, obviously he's the man of steel, and he's got the unbelievable, ability to take a punch or whatever. But you know what I'm trying to say is, the powers that be today, they want us trapped into that paradigm.
Yes.
right? They don't want us arguing about whether we're going in the wrong direction, right? Whether we're focusing on mechanical solutions, right? When it's not a question, you know what I mean? It's not a question of like, were the factories in Germany better than the factories in Detroit or something like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, that's just my opinion. I think in a sense that's why he's attacked, and the excuse they use is either his racism, extreme right-wing views, or something like that. But that's really, if you read him very much, you'll see that that's not a fair critique in the first place.
That's actually good. I mean, I describe myself as a Corbinian traditionalist. Henry Corbin, the Frenchman, is more a central piece of my thinking than Evola is. But Henry Corbin is attacked for virtually the same reasons. Because he was also saying almost identically the same sorts of things about the modern West. And that is why he's attacked by the Academy.
And then that goes along with the general agenda of dumbing everybody down as well.
Exactly.
And the divide and rule.
Divide and rule, yeah.
Right? If we're arguing, again, as I said, if we're arguing about whether Pepsi is better than Coca-Cola or Elvis is better than the Beatles, well, what kind of civilization is that? Right? And it could be worse. We could be arguing about baseball scores or something. You know what I mean? Right? You know what I mean? They've done a great job of doing this to us. We should be thinking about what is a good life, what is a good society, right? Not whether Coca-Cola or whatever Elvis is better. But anyway, okay, I tell you what, we'll wrap it up around here. Wahid, is there any last thing you want to get into? Or
no, that's all cool. Yeah.
Okay, why don't you mention your website again, or how people can find your stuff?
You can find my blog at Blogger. It's wahidazal.blogspot.com.
Okay. Well, we'll call it a wrap for this time. Thanks again, Wahid. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, it's a wrap. Take care. Bye.